Welcome to Chronicles of UK Salafism, an Insider's Perspective, episode 4. The previous episode looked at the year 1992, and before commencing 1993, I think it's necessary to review some of the personalities that I've mentioned so far to give a picture and context of who was actually promoting Salafism and active in the arena of propagation. So I've mentioned my earlier teacher, Surat Abdul Malik from Brixton. There's also Abu Muntazir, the head of Jimas, Abu Alia Sakil Sharif, another head of Jimas, Abu Talha Dawood Burbank, part of Jimas, Abdurrahim Green, who was conducting the weekly or presiding over the weekly study circles in Clapham South, also from Jimas, the only among the only African Caribbean individuals that we knew, I believe Trinidadian, Abu Sufyan Abdul Karim McDowell, also from Jimas. And there was another personality who's currently with Quilliam, which shows the, I would say, pendulum swing, as it were, from religious orthodoxy to religious liberalism, if you like. And that's none other than Usama Hassan. Um, and I have here a cassette of his, an actual lecture. He was known by the kunya or the nickname Abu Dhar at the time. And he took part in a weekend conference in Birmingham, Green Lane Mosque. This was before that particular cult established itself in Birmingham. And it was on Saturday, the 25th of July, 1992, and entitled The Sunnah. And I'm giving this picture of some of the personalities involved so that the listener can see how together or more united Salafis were in the early to mid late 90s. And as we go through the series on these chronicles, I will pinpoint where divisions and ruptures started taking place, and those personalities that emerged who were not present at these times that I've just mentioned, and in my opinion, and many others, precipitated or accelerated the division and have continued in that trend. In fact, it's their hallmark right up until today. Um, the final thing I've mentioned on this particular point is that we had, as I mentioned, a lecture from Usama Hassan on the 25th of July, 1992. Usama was also the one who translated a book that was pivotal in establishing the academia and I think the the presence of Salafism from a literature perspective in his translation of Sheikh Al-Albani's book, The Prophet's Prayer Described. And this book was monumental in establishing the position, not only regarding prayer, but the position of the Sunnah according to Salafism and its orthodoxy and its place with the four schools, the four madhahib, four schools of thought as well. And again, that was Usama Hassan who translated this book in 1993. I'll refer back once more, should I say, to another area where I have a cassette from Abu Alia Sakil Sharif on the 25th of November 1992, a talk that we attended, a Jimas talk, and that was based on some notes that he had translated, a letter from Sufyan al-Thawri. I'm not sure if the translation was done by himself, but it was from a translated works, and I've got that cassette with me, evidencing again the solidarity of some significant personalities that shaped Salafism during the 90s. Right, referring to 1993 particularly now, I mentioned in the previous episode that there were discussions around the Balkans conflict. When I went on Umrah with my colleagues, we were discussing it because the war had moved into Bosnia on the 19th of June 1992. Now, by 1993, Salafis were galvanized into action. General questions had been asked to scholars like Sheikh Uthaymeen, and his students were speaking. We understood that one of the students had actually gone to or was actually in Bosnia with a group of individuals, and so we took that position as we understood that a defensive jihad was underway. We witnessed many atrocities. There were videos being sent back to us. I personally witnessed videos where I saw a tray of the private parts, the penises and testicles of young children from around the age of 4, 5, up to young men on a tray. I witnessed that, and that was circulating around the UK from those who wanted to show the atrocities being inflicted upon the Bosnian Muslim population. There was the mass rape of women and rape camps, and we heard stories of the Serbians saying that they would impregnate Bosnian women so that there would be Serbian children, parentage, fatherhood of Serbian children being born. We know about the massacres that were well documented as well. So we were seeing all of this, and the Muslim populace on the whole in the UK and Europe were appalled by this. So we were galvanized as a community up and down the country into action, and we were very active in fundraising, charity, getting clothes for the winter, blankets, and the usual, like what is being seen or similar to what's been seen with Syria over the past few years today. Now, also, we were getting medicinal supplies and actively getting vehicles for the terrain. I remember traveling up and down speaking to certain communities, and we were getting Pajero Jeeps and everything to send over. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, some of us actually went over to fight. And at that time, the situation wasn't as it has been post 9/11. And I will say and add here emphatically that the majority, the overwhelming majority of individuals who went to fight were not violent extremists or non-violent extremists. They felt a duty to go and assist the Muslims who were being massacred with an arms embargo in place over them. So this was done, and with the full knowledge of the British government, who were not preventing individuals from traveling abroad. Um, I was later to go on a convoy to ensure that a convoy of charitable goods had arrived at their destination, and also to take specific medical instruments that were required for some of the doctors that were over there and that were actually active. A charity was formed at that time, Needy Children of the Ummah, from Abdul Haqq, the other African Caribbean individual I referred to in the previous episode that we'd seen when we joined Jimas. And that was the official line at that time of raising charitable donations, clothes, and the like. Um, on the occasion that I went later on, late 93, early 94, I traveled to Zagreb with at least four individuals to check on that particular convoy and that it had arrived safely. Um, and the fighting at that time was in Split. Now, it wasn't black and white so far as the Balkans conflict was concerned in our communication with the scholars. I've already mentioned Sheikh Uthaymeen's opinion, which was general. We understood it that we could go, it was a defensive jihad. However, the Jordanian sheikhs had a different position. And I remember when they were over for a conference, one of the Brixton conferences, when we had an informal gathering in Selsdon, just down the road at Croydon, in one of our colleagues' places. I remember Sheikh Salim raising his voice at us and becoming very angry when we were asking him why they didn't hold that it was jihad. And they were of the position that there needed to be an emir, there needed to be a leader who was presiding over the jihad, and that there wasn't an established one there. You couldn't fight jihad without an emir. And so there was disagreement. We kept quiet, showed respect to the sheikhs, but in actuality, we disagreed, and some of us chose to go with the position of Sheikh Uthaymin's general fatwa and the more emphatic, specific directive and understanding of one of his students. So it wasn't as black and white as that in that instance. Now, a lot of things were emerging from Bosnia, videos of victories of the individuals, stories of bravery and the like. But now we will refer to the lessons I was undertaking at the time. I mentioned previously that we were learning about hadith methodology, and my lessons continued on that. On the 22nd of January 1993, we looked at categories of weak hadith, Saktan Dhahir, Saktan Batin. On the 29th of January, we continued with those lessons, and the Hadith classes continued across 28th of May, 11th of June, 25th of June, 4th of November. They were more sporadic, understandably, but I want to refer to a huge event that excited all of the Salafi community up and down the country, despite the distractions and our commitment to raising charitable funds and resources for the Balkans conflict. The 1993 GMAS conference was taking place in April of that year. And I remember us attending meetings at the study circles we were going to and discussing how to advertise for the conference with the flyers, and we needed to fundraise and everything. And there was general excitement during this process of preparation. Um, when the conference arrived, and it was taking place in Leicester University. Um, for me, it was an exhilarating experience, as I'm sure it was for others. It was our first major conference that we were attending. There were going to be renowned speakers that were attending, and some who were known at that time as scholars. Um, I will list some of the lectures that were there very shortly, but it was a biannual conference, and the attendance was a few thousand. Non-Salafis attended as well, and the general ambiance was one of unity and solidarity at the time. And we know that these types of conferences really deflated the cells of groups, organizations like Hizb ut-Tahrir. So some of the lectures that took place, I'll list them now. I have the cassettes, so I'm reading from the cassettes that I have with me. The Correct Creed by Sheikh Mohammed Ismail, who was an Egyptian scholar, and he only attended on at that particular time. After that, we did not refer much to him. The politics and everything around that, I cannot recall. The next lecture that I have here, the Companions by Sheikh Ali Hassan Al Halabi, who is a very popular speaker and sheikh for all of us at the conference on that occasion. The Way of the Pious Predecessors, Sheikh Mohammed Ismail again. Then we had the session that was quite a long session. I've got three cassettes on, and it was discussing advice on Hizb ut-Tahrir by a panel of scholars, and the panel comprised Sheikh Mohammed Ismail, Ali Hassan, and Ali Tamimi. Then from memory, and I can be corrected because there were some cassettes that I was actually looking for. I remember there was a sheikh called Safwat Nuruddin, another Egyptian sheikh who delivered a lecture on patience, the tools of strength for dawah. But I can be corrected that in my memory, whether it was that 93 conference or the one 2 years later, there's also another very memorable lecture in which I delivered the introduction to the speaker, who was none other than Dr. Bilal Phillips, entitled Unity Upon What? Now that's available on YouTube, and I will try and provide the link via one of the avenues that you can listen to this podcast. And that was a very, very memorable lecture because Dr. Bilal discussed his time and some of their times as students studying at Medina University, and around the time, at the same time, should I say, as Juhayman al-Utaybi, the individual who took Makkah under siege in 1979. And clearly, the story that Dr. Bilal Phillips elucidated it was very captivating. He and many others, including scholars, up and coming scholars, moved away from Al Juhayman due to some of the extremes they saw taking place. And in my cultish tendencies series, there's a particular episode that is dedicated to that account. So I won't repeat that here. And then I have another cassette, the conference conclusions that were delivered by Abu Muntazir Ibn Mohar Ali, as is on the cassette. That's none other than Abu Muntazir himself. So this was, I would say, a very, very strategic time in the 90s to deliver such a conference. And it reverberated right across the country and parts of Europe because of our referencing people of knowledge, speakers, knowledgeable speakers, and the topics that were focusing on the Sunnah, on Tawheed, how to apply and practice the religion during uh, within, sorry, the context of British society. Now, I'll go back to the Convert's cognitive development framework that I developed. I said I would refer to this throughout to gauge where I actually was as a growing Muslim. And I indicated in the previous discourse that I was moving from the first of the four phases, the founding convergent phase, to the youthful phase, which was a more formative, overzealous, and idealistic phase. And this is a phase, I would say, of increased activism, religious activism. And evidence of that was the involvement in raising funds and getting resources for the war in the Balkans at the time, the activism around promoting the Jimas conference at the time, the lectures that I was delivering, they were still taking place. However, they were not as much during that particular year due to the events that I've just described. So that particular youthful idealistic phase is one that many go through following the founding conversions phase that I've described earlier. The final pivotal moment, I would say, during that year was one that I think shaped the direction of Salafism so far as London was concerned. And that was an event that occurred on the 2nd of May 1993 at Brixton Mosque, which has been commonly referred to as Black Sunday. This was an occasion when the then Morabitoon leadership, as they declared themselves, stepped down due to overwhelming pressure from the community who felt they'd been duped and deceived by Uthman Morrison at the time, who had, with a group of individuals around him, forced out Sheikh Salah, sorry, Al Jannah. At the time, Sheikh Salah went peacefully, which was nice of him. This was as expected from him as a very humble individual. And then we saw emerge this Morabitoon phase or period somewhat by stealth. And the reason I say by stealth is because some of us joined and were asked to join the Shura, the committee, and there was no declaration of Sufism or anything, just about progression and developing the community. And a number of us were invited to go out on a weekend retreat to Lampeter in Wales. I was one of those who was invited from the younger members of the community. And we spent some sessions, really good management, coordinative meetings, brainstorming, talking about the vision for the community, how we wanted to move forward. But what was clear to me and what was very evident is that Uthman Morrison was being groomed for some sort of leadership, okay, um, beyond what we thought was just the leadership of the mosque. And it wasn't until we returned after that weekend to Brixton that we were sitting in the audience waiting for him to declare some of the strategic objectives that we had discussed and agreed to share with the community. But instead, what was declared is that he was the emir and that Murabatun, the Sufi movement, were the ones who were taking helm of the masjid and community, and that they wanted the community to give bayah, a pledge of allegiance. Now, this caused uproar. Even myself was taken aback by this, as were a number of individuals who attended that weekend retreat, Surat Abdul Malik and a few others. And we resigned from the Shura completely because we felt that we'd been tricked. Anyway, it came to this particular occasion, 2nd of May 1993, and Uthman had stepped down. There is a document, a 99-page booklet of research that I think well put together, that you can find on the salafimanhaj.com, which articulates all of what took place on that occasion. It's called A Call from the Towers, about the ignorance of Yusuf Bowers. Yusuf Bowers is one of the individuals from Birmingham who's now part of that Salafi Publications cult. And the reason this was written as a refutation against him is because he delivered a lecture which was so inaccurate and distorted, and untrue, that we felt compelled, our colleagues felt compelled, that we would bring out our archives. And our archives consist of recordings of that day. It consists of interviews with elder members of the community, younger members of the community. It consists of an interview conducted with Sheikh Wasila Abbas about gathering and presenting historical evidence regarding Salafism. So that's available, and I don't want to go into too much detail concerning that. But in that particular meeting, community meeting, there's the Salafi voice emerged very strong, very prominent. So when the decision was made to select a group of individuals who would then retreat into another room and decide amongst themselves who was going to become the next leader of the community, the majority of individuals who were selected in that room to go into that room were Salafis. Okay, and I'll say what some of the names. Some of the names included Abu Sufyan, um, Abu Sophia, Talib Alexander, myself, Surat Abdul Malik. It included Abdul Malik Trinidadi, who I mentioned before, with that Dal Harb and that open-ended interpretation of the Quran, which led to some problems. And amongst that smaller group, it was almost a foregone conclusion that a Salafi was going to be chosen. And Abdul Karim Abu Sufyan was the one selected from among us after some had declined, and we thought no one else can decline because it would just leave unanimously Abdul Malik by default. So Abu Sufyan was chosen. The preference for everyone, even to this day, would have been Surat Abdul Malik because of our respect for him as our mentor and elder, but he declined for a few reasons, one of them being his ill health or his deteriorating health. So Abu Sufyan became the leader. I have a cassette in front of me that after the 2nd of May, the first khutbah sermon that he delivered was 5 days later, the 7th of May 1993, and I still have that cassette here with me now. Without taking this too much further, I see from the conclusion of 1993, it was a year of consolidation of the Salafis, a year of achievement from the conferences, from the respect that was afforded to us as a young entity, and because of our involvement regarding Bosnia and the going backwards and forwards, the establishing of a charity from one of us, even some colleagues went over and brought some of the widows back. They married some of the Bosnian women, adopted some of the children, and things like that. So these achievements, plus the Salafi presence in a mosque in the UK for the first time in London, and a convert-led mosque, a convert-led mosque at that, was a crowning, I would say, of achievements for 1993. The only lecture that I see, and I have notes for, handwritten notes for, from myself, was a talk that I gave on the 7th of November 1993, entitled The Day of Judgment and the Events Leading Up to It. It may not have been the only talk I gave during that year, but these are the only handwritten notes that I have that I can reference and evidence. So I will conclude on that this was the latest and last of the events that I recall and have details of for that particular year. With that, I will end and continue into 1994 and the way Salafism continued to grow and develop. Thus far, I hope that the listener has heard from the previous three episodes and this one, where the focus was for Salafism. And when there was an active battlefield, if you like, in the Balkans, 2 hours away from us, there was not an extremist element present or emerging from among us. We were aware of some extremist elements that were not Salafi, that were wanting to participate and get involved in traveling abroad. And we never opened up any of the avenues or the doors or the contacts that we had for them. Those who did manage to get across, what we did see or hear from returning young men was the confusion they had, because they said they'd met individuals who were not declaring themselves Salafis whatsoever, and they were not amongst the groups and entities that we knew. And they were telling these individuals, return to the UK and sit quietly with your British passport until the jihad takes place in the UK, because it's Darul Harb. That Takfiri element was at that time and continues to be an element that we refute in our writing, on our pulpits, online, and that will continue as long as their presence is in the UK or anywhere. And that is a trend of Salafism all over the world. And that's why Salafism continues to be the ideology, the orthodoxy that is best equipped to combat and counter violent and non-violent radicalization.